It's only one application of rare earths, and there are a lot. So that is in total about $3,100 billion a year. These are substantially enabled by permanent magnet electric motors, worth $23 billion. 65% of these magnets are rare earth permanent magnets. And that share, it's a milkmaid calculation, but can be viewed as about $2.1 trillion. Good morning. My name is Thomas Kruemmer. I'm German. I spent 31 years living and working in China and Japan. Currently, I live in Singapore. First time I got in touch with rare earths was in 2012 when I became the chair of the Metal and Mining Working Group of the EU Chamber of Commerce. I sat in government-to-government meetings and endless conferences about rare earths, so that is who I am. I like the old Chinese saying, seek truth from fact. They themselves don't really like it, but I like it. There are some things about this presentation. Basically, this is a very complicated and long subject, so I keep it really, really brief, very short, and simplify a lot. Having said that, if you do anything based on this presentation, it will be at your own account and risk. This is not a sales pitch, it's simply the world according to my little company in terms of rare earths. If you look at rare earths, they barely register. Yeah? If you have here, for example, a chart from Bloomberg about the multi-trillion-dollar net zero opportunity. There is a little yellow line at the top that is rare earths. It just doesn't register. Here you have the bill of materials for offshore wind farms. That little yellow line on the top is rare earth. Then you have from the International Energy Agency here the investment demand projection and the undercover of investment in metals. Rare earths do not appear on it. So I give you some growth drivers. In the end, you will understand how 94% of the world rare earth markets tick, basing on only 4 products. Here you have the white goods. This particular company projects a growth of about 7-point-something% for the next few years. Here you have the industrial robots installations, which are strongly growing. This is factory automation. Whenever you talk about factory automation, you talk about robots. And if you talk about robots, you talk about rare earths. These are, of course, the new energy vehicles, as they're called in China, or say battery electric vehicles, BEV, or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles that are the ones how we refer to it in the West. Growth rate is very strong. So what do they have in common? The permanent magnet electric motor that has a world market size of about $52 billion. You have it in white goods. Your entire household runs on this type of motor, a permanent magnet electric motor. You can't even take a shower without it. The world market size of this is about $700 billion. Then you have industrial robots. Also, these only function with permanent magnet electric motors. You see, everything that moves there is driven by such a motor. It's about $16.8 billion market size. Then, of course, the passenger vehicles. Average passenger vehicles will have about 25 of these motors inside. This one has even more. This is actually a regular vehicle, regular combustion engine vehicle. So here I've listed for you the different motors that are inside. That is non-exhaustive because I have seen in China a vehicle that had 140 of these motors inside, but as a fair average, you can say it's about 25. World market size, $1,900 billion. Then, with a fair amount of apprehension, defense, whenever people talk about rare earths, they talk about defense. If you hear junior rare earth miners going about it, you get the impression that there's a worker with a little pile of blue powder on the ground that he's shoveling into an F-35 airplane. This is certainly not the case. An F-35 contains dozens, probably hundreds of permanent magnet electric motors. Rare earth miners will tell you it's about 400 kilos of rare earths inside this bomber. Then cruise missile. How does it find its targets and how do you steer it into the targets? You have the flaps in the end. And they are regulated by permanent magnet electric motors. Drones, goes without saying, again, the same motors. The world market size for defense, not all driven by these motors, but it's about $483 billion a year. What is the permanent magnet that is inside these electric motors? You have 4 kinds. One is the aluminum nickel cobalt magnet that is, I think, invented in 1934. Then you have the ferrite magnets, the traditional ones, and then you have the samarium cobalt magnets, SMCO, that was invented in the early 1970s at a defense laboratory in the US and has been the default magnet until well into the 1980s. And then you have the neodymium iron boron magnet that was invented in the early 80s and patented in Japan. But there were parallel developments. Also, this was developed for defense in the US. These are the 2 rare earth permanent magnets. And the last one is the strongest one. So you can see here what share the different magnets have by volume in the permanent magnet market. And you can see that the majority are rare earth-based permanent magnets. As I said, the neodymium magnets are so popular because they are the lightest, smallest, and strongest magnets that we know. Yeah, the weakness is they are demagnetizing under heat. They are brittle, and they need coating because they rust very, very quickly. If you talk about defense, the default magnet in defense is the samarium cobalt magnet because it is not so heat sensitive and it will not rust. Here, very briefly, the production process of this type of magnet. What you essentially do is you mix the oxides, you deoxidize, you cast ingots, and the ingots you're grinding until it's powder. The powder you orientate under a magnetic field, and then you sinter, basically compress the whole thing. And what happens then, that is very beautiful, you have a blank of a magnet, but your customer, he needs many, many different sizes, you know, it needs to be all cut to size. And because of that, you have a lot of off-cut. Yeah, if you imagine the customer needs small, round-shaped magnet pieces, you cut it from a block, you will have 35% off-cut. And that is the material that is easiest to be recycled, and that is actually the material that is most sought after for recycling, because in the next step, as I told you, you have to absolutely coat it. And there are many different coatings. I think there are 4 main coatings. And this is customer driven. The customer says what coating he wants for the magnet, and the coating is determined by the technical drawing. And the technical drawing is a holy piece of paper. You never change it. So this is a big problem for recyclers because if the coating is different, the whole treatment process is different. So if you see recycling hopefuls in the West, you know, they keep complaining about that particular thing when they talk about scrap, because the previous scrap in step 6 is basically almost not available in the West. The ingredients of the magnet are it's basically iron and rare earth. Approximately 30 to 40% of the contents is neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, and terbium. The latter two are added in order to increase the heat resistance of the magnet. To give you a comparison, a samarium cobalt magnet will demagnify at about 400 degrees Celsius. The best neodymium magnet that we have, the most heat resistant, will start demagnetizing at around 250 degrees Celsius. So the world market size of that is a mere $23 billion. So to sum it up a little bit in between, this is non-exhaustive, and it's only one application of rare earths, and there are a lot. So that is in total about $3,100 billion a year. These are substantially enabled by permanent magnet electric motors, worth $23 billion. 65% of these magnets are rare earth permanent magnets. And that share, I mean, it's a milkmaid calculation, but can be viewed as about $2.1 trillion a year. Of these rare earth permanent magnets, samarium cobalt is a really, really small share. It has been largely replaced by the neodymium magnet simply because of performance characters. So these are only 4 elements of the rare earths, and that brings us to the question, if the numbers are as I presented, then why do they not register? I give you here the bill of materials for an electric vehicle. The numbers are inconsistent because, for example, for copper, Bloomberg has a completely different number. That is because you have such a wide variety of vehicles and the average is very hard to establish. But you can see rare earths will generally be about 1.5 kilos per electric vehicle, and that is 0.72%. It doesn't register. Even though, for example, for the anodes, even of the batteries, which are in high fashion, you need neodymium. So what are rare earths? Now I have to bore you with the periodic table. It doesn't work any other way. You can see here 16 rare earth elements. One of them is extinct, that is promethium, that has such a short half-life that it's basically non-existent anymore. What I'd like to point out is that rare earths love radioactivity, so you will have, in most deposits, you will have a share of radioactive materials that will have to be permanently disposed of. In the EU, for example, we have now 27 facilities for temporary storage of radioactive waste. In case of thorium, we are talking about a product with a half-life of 14.2 billion years. That is approximately as long as this universe is old. So temporary may not suffice. So the typical rare earth ores that you will hear are bastnäsite, monazite, iron adsorption clays, low-pyrite, mostly Russia, and apatite, for example, from Australia. The quantities of rare earths are typically expressed as the content of rare earth oxides inside. So it's like TREO. If you, for example, look at the USGS statistics, they list TREO, the total rare earth oxide content, not the absolute quantity of ore. So this way, an impression is being caused that some rare earth companies like to exploit, that in the West there would be production of separated rare earth oxides, which is mildly saying misleading. For example, MP Materials, they are selling something that I like to refer to as mud because of the high water content. It is a totally unsophisticated bastnäsite concentrate that they ship to China. Yeah? They like to say, we ship it to China for processing, which implies they get the finished product back for resale, which is, of course, not the case. This type of export processing has been illegal in China for ages. Okay, so Yeah, the value chain is basically the metals are not stable. They in average they rust very, very quickly and go back to the oxide stage. That's why the tradable form of rare earths will always be a compound, be it an oxide, a chloride, or a fluoride. Yeah. Our estimate is that last year the output of rare earth oxides was about 330,000 tons in the world. That includes recycling, as I've pointed out earlier in the magnet production number 6, where the resource is for the recycling the most popular resource. Yeah. Liners, we have outside China, the biggest one is Liners. They produce in Kuantan in Malaysia. Toyotsu in India, they have been there for, I think, more than 10 years and always had trouble to get the feed material from India Rare Earth Limited. Then you have Vietnam Rare Earth Limited, which is essentially China-owned. And then you have Neo Performance Materials, who inherited from Moly Corporation the processing facility in Estonia. The rest of all this is China. You often hear miners going about having a heavy rare earth deposit, implying that they are only on the very expensive, hard to extract heavy rare earths, which are desperately needed for the magnet production in order to have a heat-resistant NdFeB magnet. Yeah. This is a guide to the classification, how we classify in the West and how China classifies rare earths, just for a matter of understanding. So here I show you the typical light rare earth deposit and a typical heavy rare earth deposit. And you can see that basically they contain all the same elements. It's only a question of proportion of appearance. And that is why some, say, iron adsorption clay deposits are being named heavy rare earth, and some bastnäsite deposits go as light rare earth deposits. Also important for understanding is you cannot cherry pick rare earth products. You have to separate them one by one from one another, which is a very tedious process, which, say, generally involves the most aggressive acids known to mankind and washing the source material 1,000 times with it. There is an imbalance in it because when you separate all of them, not for every product, there is demand equivalent to what you produce. So if you, for example, want to produce neodymium praseodymium, you will, by default, you will have lanthanum and cerium. And then you have a question how to dispose of it. Yeah, so generally saying, if you want to pick one of the products, you automatically overproduce others. So here this is, say, a global chart, taking all deposits together with the average values, yeah, in the output. And this is the same chart, but as value. And you can see that neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, and terbium are 94% of the value. Here you can see what the imbalance leads to. You have, in terms of output, you have nearly 70% lanthanum and cerium, which are only 4% or 3% of the value. So they cost about $1 a kilo nowadays, but you can also have them cheaper. Yeah. Strangely, this is exactly what the West depends on from China. These products are used as a catalyst in the gasoline refineries, and they are used to manufacture the exhaust catalyst for normal combustion engine cars and for hybrid cars. That is the main application of these two. Then you have in cerium, you have polishing powder. 80% of cerium polishing powder is used to polish mobile phones. And here you have the four magnet materials that I described before. Yeah, they are just 22% of the average output, but 94% of the value. Yeah. The permanent magnet material, NdPr, that is the main material. These are very, very difficult to separate. And Linus, I think, only succeeded 2 years ago to separate these two, because the separated products have different markets and applications. NdPr has only one application, and that is the permanent magnet. So NdFeB production, the magnet production of rare earth neodymium magnets was about 230,000 tons last year. China's share of that was 220,000 tons, and the rest was largely Japan or Japanese companies in Asia. The rest of the world is a few hundred tons. Then the players in the market in China is an extremely fragmented market. The largest player has just about 6 to 7% of market share. So there are a lot of manufacturers, but there are many different kinds of NdFeB magnets. The commodity type is not suitable for, say, electric vehicles or wind turbines or anything like that because of the temperature resistance. So the top 6 are basically the ones you're looking at when you look at high performance heat-resistant magnets. So the NdFeB China market share is 95%. The finished rare earth products, China has a market share of about 92%. And the consumption of, say, new energy vehicles and wind towers and all that is growing. So NdFeB pulls rare earths. Yeah, we can see in the 94% value share. No? 70% of the rare earths that the West is buying are the uneconomical products, lanthanum and cerium, and which broadly define the West's dependence on China. Yeah. I guess they are sold at about a quarter of the production cost. How this is an investment is quite simple. China is short of rare earths. China is supposed to have about 27% of world resources in rare earths, but it's turning out more than 90% of the products. So the Chinese government about 10 years ago decided that this is unsustainable. They don't want this. They want to preserve their resources. And this way, they kicked off actually imports of rare earth raw materials. Yeah. There was a shortage of technical shortage of more than 6,000 tons of neodymium praseodymium. And they hope to reduce it by 2024 to about 2,800 tons, which is still enormous. The China Northern Rare Earth Group is just now building an integrated complex for additional processing of about 100,000 tons of rare earth oxides and rare earth metals. And China is generally looking for rare earth raw materials. The imports of rare earth raw materials that will be used for rare earth production was about $1.7 billion last year. And heavy mineral sands, which more often than not contain monazite, one of the rare earth ores, was about $2.8 billion import last year. So basically the concept would be to export rare earth raw materials to China. What China is doing is for domestically mined raw material, there is a resource tax applicable at quite substantial rates, as you can see in the chart here. But this resource tax does not apply to imported raw materials. So that means imported raw materials will be cheaper to use, if at the same price, than the domestic raw materials. And then the famous China rare earth quota that the Ministry of Industry publicizes twice a year, where it basically orders the 4 main rare earth groups to produce no more than a certain quantity of rare earth oxides. This applies only to production based on domestic raw materials. Import does not count into that. So that means all of them are free to process product that has been imported with no restriction. So there is, of course, the politically ambitious idea in the US and also in Europe to produce rare earths and rebuild a supply chain that basically doesn't exist, which will inevitably lead to a situation where either one will have to export. Where to? The only market there is basically China and Japan, but Japan is on a different piece of paper. There is a trade war duty against US finished rare earths of about, depending on product, 25 to 27.5%, which is basically prohibitive. So if you start producing in the US, and you need to export some of your products, China cannot be the market. We have seen that MP Materials, they have the plan of producing 6,000 tons of NdPr per year. They plan to have their own magnet manufacturing of 1,000 tons per year. That means that one will consume about 300 tons. That leaves a balance of 5,700 tons of NdPr. Where do they want to ship it to? Yeah, there is no market for it. There is the other thing that I described, the heat resistance of the magnets is dependent on heavy rare earths, dysprosium and terbium. At this time, there is no Western company that can consistently produce dysprosium or terbium. The processing is very, very tedious and very, very difficult, which also puts a question mark behind magnet projects in the West. Again, one can cite MP Materials. It's beautiful that they can produce 1,000 tons, but they will still have to buy the heavy rare earths from China. Of course, now people may argue the Department of Energy or Defense, I forgot, has given them money to produce heavy rare earths from the Mountain Pass resource. But if MP Materials would do that, they would consume per year a quantity of dysprosium and terbium that they would need 20 years to produce. So this doesn't fly. Yeah, it's out of question. So these two materials are always missing. If people say liners, if you go back to the processing chart, liners separate lanthanum, cerium, and neodymium, praseodymium. Everything that comes thereafter, they sell to China because they can't do it. So Japan has more than 10-year involvement with liners. They were instrumental with the investment to bring liners up to speed, and they salvaged liners in between from bankruptcy also. And just recently, the Japan Oil and Gas Commission put another $200 million into liners. Liners produced 5,800 tons of NdPr in the last financial year, and Japan has a demand of 5,000 tons. So I do not see how a company other than liners could sell in Japan. Our governments are mildly saying confused. They simply don't know what they are doing, and just throwing money at the problem will not solve it. I mean, the average time it needs in the US to start a mining operation in rare earths is estimated to be 17 years. So we can safely forget about that. I have proposed to the US government to make one-stop registrations, but of course the bureaucracy doesn't like it. Bureaucracy likes to expand, not to contract. What else do we have? Yeah, oh yeah, then these ambitious projects to from mine to magnet, in recognition of the fact that there is no real market for the value-carrying rare earths in the West. Some junior miners come with the concept of ore to magnet production. This requires a mastership of several extremely difficult processes, which not even the masters in this business in China try. Yeah, these are separated pieces of the value chain, and I estimate that the working capital requirements for such business will be crushing. Yeah. Also, we do not have the experts to do this. Whereas industry has not been existing in the West basically for 30 years, we just don't have the expertise. And even if you look at scientific papers, the majority is issued by, published by people who have Chinese names and who are probably Chinese nationals. There are also a lot of patents resting on this. So a junior miner who seriously wants to go into this must consider that he may be challenged on legal grounds. So to disable China's dominance in rare earths would require to substitute the rare earth permanent magnets. And this is constantly tried. I think you have recently seen the announcement by Tesla that they will take out the rare earth magnets from their motors. But that is the propulsion, of course, not the window lifts and the windscreen wipers and the seat adjustments and all that. That will remain rare earth. That they will probably use the aluminum nickel cobalt magnet. It comes at the expense of power and of energy efficiency, which may be about 20% lower. So that means your range will be reduced, say, from 400 kilometers to 320 kilometers, which is okay. And the strength of magnet, I wonder why we need passenger vehicles with 450 horsepowers. You know, we have speed limits, we have crawling traffics in the city. We don't need that. 150 horsepowers will be enough. So, and I guess that is the same school of thought at Tesla when doing away with the magnet in the motors. So if other companies follow suit, it will flatten the growth curve for rare earth magnets in electric vehicles. And that may help to bring down the supply-demand gap that we are looking at. Another thing, if the governments really pull through with establishing rare earth supply chains in a respective country, be it EU, be it the US, they absolutely will need tariff protection, because you cannot expect of companies to compete with China's Ministry of Finance. Yeah, let this be totally clear. They dominate the market, they're the monopolists, and they are not about to give it away. Yeah, the patents I mentioned. The investment point is really supplying raw materials to China in rare earths. That is where money can be made. The case in point, MP Materials. They're shipping a very inferior product and get a lot of money for it. And they are constantly on the lookout for more. We've seen the prime agency of China for investing abroad. We've seen them trying to invest in Greenland. We've seen them investing in Australian companies. We've seen them investing in Africa. And they're always open to raw materials. I keep getting inquiries from China for that. So if one wants to go and invest in rare earth junior miners, that should be the objective. I give you, again, we talked only about one application of rare earth. Here at the end, I give you another example of rare earth. This is an American-made tire with rubber that was made in Russia, using a catalyst that was manufactured by a Swiss company in South Africa, based on neodymium imported from China. So just another example. And that's basically all I have to say about that. Thank you very much for your attention. Any questions?
Very difficult one. In medicine, have you seen, it was about a decade ago, IBM, which is really one of the leaders in new materials.
Yeah.
But then it became very quiet, and I'm asking you, to use actually nanomaterials and rare earths to use in medicine, particularly to attach, for example, to cancer cells, or actually to kill, cancer cells, and there various Novartis has a product out. So of course it wouldn't use a lot of quantity, but for mankind is of course very significant. So have you heard anything in this? And the totally different thing is Korea. It was not mentioned. It's an excellent presentation. Danke vielmals. Korea, they are making efforts into rare earths, of course, together with an Australian company, Australian Strategic Minerals. But then do you think that will be fruitful, or it just will be a dead end? That's two totally different questions.
So in medicine, I would say one of the biggest applications would be MRI. What is it called? Magnetic resonance, whatever. And for this, you actually use also a contrast liquid that is injected, that is based on gadolinium. I'm not aware of the cancer treatment. Siemens Medical in the US, they are buying a fringe product that is actually one of the rarest rare earths, lutetium, but I'm not pretty sure what is the application. But they're the largest buyer on the planet. There's another laser company in the US who's also buying it. Korea. The Koreans tried to emulate Japan. Japan has been fighting for decades a defensive battle against the Chinese magnates. And Korea is trying to catch up. The project with ASM to locate a rare earth metal making facility, so the precursor to grinding the metal and then turning it into magnets, was an idea because ASM also, when they did their marketing plan, the question was, where do we sell our product? No, there is no market. Japan is liners, and China, we can't get in. We can't compete with them, so what do we do? And the idea was then to have a metal-making facility in Korea. The basic concept at this time of this facility is to use Chinese raw materials. So that facility is operating, but it operates on Chinese raw materials until ASM are ready with their Dabo project. And Dabo is a very, very difficult resource because it is so-called polymetallic, which means that the rare earths are appearing in conjunction with a lot of other metals like tantalum, niobium, hafnium they have inside, zirconium, and so on. And to process this will be extremely expensive. So I do not recall, but I think it was above $1 billion Australian dollars that they would need. And for the rare earths, the idea was to process it in Vietnam, at Vietnam Rare Earth, Chinese owned, and from there ship the oxides to Korea. I personally, they can sue me for that, do not think that this project will ever see the light of day, because there is a uranium mining ban in New South Wales. And this production, if it ever comes up to scale, will produce about 50 tons of uranium a year. So, and I've had numerous approaches by ASM for me to stop saying that they will never get a license, and that they actually have a license. And I always said, show me the license, and I will publicly withdraw from my argument, and I will say you're fully permitted. So far, it hasn't happened. I'm still waiting. Yeah. So that is, and you can also see it in the stock price. I'm not the only one who doesn't believe in ASM. Yeah, it's a sad story because a lot of work has gone into this. I think the first pre-feasibility study they had in 2000 or 2001. Yeah. And a lot of good people spent a lot of time trying to make it work, but I don't think it will.
Thank you. You basically said that the only feasible way currently is exporting raw materials to China. And this is what MP, for example, is doing right now. At the same time, MP is also trying to do their own thing. Why would they try? Why would they want to try? Why is this a project that MP considers smart?
Yeah, I don't know if you know how MP came into being. 2017, the Mountain Pass mine, as part of the bankruptcy of Molycorp, was supposed to be auctioned off. And there were two bidders. One was a Swiss consortium with Russian backing, and another one was a US consortium with Chinese backing. The Russians were told not to bid. And the Chinese consortium bought it for $20 million. Ostensibly, the Chinese share was less than 10%, so CFI US would not have had to discuss it. Nobody knew that there was a warrant, which would have increased the Chinese investment to double digits. But okay, so and what happened then was the Chinese company Shanghai Resources, which is basically directly controlled by the State Council in China, made hundreds of millions of dollars of advance payments to enable production. And they also helped in making the concentrate. This goes to the limits as to what technological support Chinese companies can render, because there is an export prohibition and restriction list on technologies from China, which include the core technologies, how China processes rare earths. This is not exactly rocket science, and there are enough papers published on it and enough lab-scale processes have been developed, but China restricts it, so a Chinese company cannot assist in going further downstream. So the exports of the bastnäsite concentrate from Mountain Pass are extremely profitable for MP Materials, and the stock price of MP Materials has also helped the profitability of Shanghai Resources. So everything was wonderful. Now the US government is determined to bring back a rare earth supply chain to the United States, and they are more or less hapless in doing that. And you have the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense on it. The Department of Defense got a warning shot from China to say, we do not like it if weapons that threaten China are made with Chinese raw materials. Now, the Americans can say the same. We don't like it if your cruise missiles contain chips that we have delivered to you. So, but anyway, they got a warning shot, and then there were sanctions threats against Lockheed Martin. So they invest, or they made investment promises to companies where they think there is hope that they can alleviate the absence of a value chain. And there's two companies, one is Lynas and the other one is MP, simply because they have an existing positive EBITDA. there was no other qualification. If you look closely, the Department of Defense, the amounts allocated will just suffice to cover the demand of the Department of Defense subcontractors. It will not be more than that. There will be no commercial quantities coming out of that for resale in the rest of the market, except for maybe lanthanum and cerium. So MP Materials also got money, and I don't remember if it was DOD or DOE, for processing heavy rare earths. But this is a bastnäsite deposit. It has a very, very small amount of these heavy rare earths inside. And as I mentioned during the presentation, for covering their own demand for 1,000 tons of magnets in Texas, MP Materials will have to produce heavy rare earths for 20 years. For 1 year of consumption in Texas, it doesn't fly. It is simply not possible. Yeah. The same applies to liners. The idea was a facility in Texas that would also focus partly on heavy rare earths. But the resource of liners, Mount Weld in Australia, doesn't have the contents, you know, and commercially, I do not see how this can ever work. On top of that, please remember, liners separate the first 4 rare earths, that is lanthanum, cerium, praseodymium, and neodymium. That's it. The rest, they ship to China. So they also don't know if they can do it. Yeah. So this is all very experimental. There are companies in the US that may have some ability, but they are also sometimes owned by people who have a head through the wall attitude and do not grab opportunities.
Thank you.